Life can be overwhelming, even without having to deal with the coronavirus. There are times in life when we feel overwhelmed by our circumstances. And maybe you feel more isolated and alone today. Sometimes it's the waves of tragedy or loss that have come unexpectedly into our lives, and you feel like you're drowning. Maybe that's how you feel this season. Maybe it's the darkness of a bad situation that has never lifted, and the season we're in has just made it worse. And you feel abandoned. In those moments, we do wonder if God really cares for us. It's certainly what the disciples of Jesus felt in Mark chapter 4, verse 35 to 41. In Mark's account of the life of Jesus, the followers of Jesus were crossing the Sea of Galilee. And as they sailed, a wild storm descends. We're told fear overwhelmed them as the waves literally began to drown them. And it appears that Jesus didn't care because he was fast asleep. And in Mark's account of the story of Jesus, in great desperation, the followers of Jesus woke up. And they asked if he really cared about them. Jesus, don't you care that we're drowning? And in an instant, he calmed the wind and the waves. Let me encourage you to maybe read that this week with your family. The story of Jesus calming the storm is not an unusual one. And it's actually quite similar to another story in the Bible where we meet another group of men caught in a violent storm, where another man is sleeping at the bottom of the boat. It's the story of Jonah, actually, the story of God's runaway prophet. There in Jonah chapter 1, the boat is overwhelmed by a great storm, and it's actually sinking. The sailors are desperate, and Jonah is asleep. You read this in Jonah chapter 1. Let me read that for you, verse 12 and verse 11. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" And Jonah responds, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he replies, "and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." God's judgment in the form of an actual storm has come on them because of Jonah's disobedience and rebellion. And Jonah was right. He deserved death, didn't he? And so he says, if I die, if I face the judgment I deserve, you will live. And so he says, throw me into the ocean of God's judgment, and the sea will become calm. And so in Jonah chapter 1, the sailors throw him into the ocean, and we read the sea became calm. Now notice in the story of Jesus calming the storm, you actually notice that no one actually dies. No one is thrown into the sea until we get to the end of Mark's gospel. You find Jesus in Mark chapter 14, deeply distressed and deeply troubled as he faces death, a storm in the lead up to Good Friday. We read in Mark chapter 14, verse 34 and verse 35, Jesus says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." You read further in verse 35 that Jesus fell to the ground. He was overwhelmed and he felt alone. And he prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. We read verse 36, "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." Now, in the very next chapter in Mark 15, you find that Jesus is violently seized. His disciples all abandon him. He's spat at, beaten physically to a pulp. His back is scourged and ripped to shreds. He's struck with a staff, and he's finally nailed to a cross. And there on the cross, he dies. Chapter 14 to chapter 16 would be a great portion of the Bible to read with your family this Easter weekend. Now, the reason why Jesus is able to calm every storm, every wave, and every hurricane is because at the cross, he was thrown into the ultimate storm. At the cross, Jesus faced the crushing waves of our judgment and our sin and our death. Unlike Jonah, who deserved to die for his rebellion, Jesus didn't deserve to die, did he? But he willingly allowed himself to be thrown into the ocean of God's judgment for you. He was crushed in your place. He was sacrificed for you. And that's what makes Good Friday good. It's good news for me and it's good news for you because Jesus died for the undeserving. It's good news for you and it's good news for me because Jesus sacrificed his life for us. Has it ever occurred to you that there's only one storm in life that we should all be afraid of? One storm in life that can sink us forever. COVID isn't what we should be most afraid of. Our children's education in the season we're in shouldn't be our greatest worry. Recession isn't what should keep us up awake at night. What should worry us is the storm of God's judgment for the life we've lived, running away from God and ignoring him. Jesus was thrown into that storm and he was crushed under those waves at the cross. And his death calmed the ultimate storm of God's judgment in our lives. Christian author Tim Keller writes these words, "If the sight of Jesus bowing his head as he faced the ultimate storm is burned into the very core of your being, you will never say, 'God, don't you care for me?' If you know that Jesus has not abandoned you in that ultimate storm, you should realize that he'll never abandon you in the much smaller storms that you are experiencing and storms that you will face in the weeks and the months ahead. Has it ever occurred to you that if Jesus allowed himself to be thrown into the storm of God's judgment for you at the cross, it means that he actually does love you. You're not alone and you'll never be alone. That means whatever is happening in your life right now, even when things are dark, even if you feel that you're sinking under the waves, even when the road ahead seems quite uncertain, remember, God does care for you this Easter. Look at the cross, where Jesus was swept away by the waves of God's judgment for you. And remember that he does care for you, so keep trusting him. It's really important to remember that, isn't it? And I want to say to you, there will be times when life will seem overwhelming. And I want to say to you, look ahead. In those moments, remember that Jesus has gone before you. He has walked before you through the valley of the shadow of death. And he has let the waves overwhelm him. He has entered the eye of the storm and allowed himself to be destroyed for you at the cross. And if Jesus has saved you from the ultimate storm, then there is no storm in your life that can or will ever sink you. He rules the wind and the waves. They know his name. And the good news is that he also knows your name this Easter. That is why we can sing with confidence and joy that wonderful song, "In Christ alone my hope is found. He is my light, my strength, my song. This cornerstone, this solid ground, firm through the fiercest drought and storm. What heights of love, what depths of peace, when fears are still, when strivings cease. My comforter, my all in all, here in the love of Christ I stand. No guilt in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in me. From life's first cry to final breath, Jesus commands my destiny." Friends, God bless you this Good Friday and this Easter Sunday.